This is more or less a Q&A session. I got a comment from one of my videos, my interview with Ryan, the winner of Warzone Atlanta. Um, and that comment was very well thought out and well argued. There's a lot of claims in it, and I wanted to go through them with you guys. And I also wanted to point to some of my earlier videos because I have actually done videos on the claims before that are put forward in that video, and it's also sort of a response to the questions that are asked, the claims that are made, and maybe also a little bit of a defense for my own thoughts on the matter. So let's go and see. Just a second, I'll just set up here. Right. So it was Whiskey Jack Sede who wrote me a very nice and very long comment. Thank you for that one. And it is the reason and the response that I'm giving here. He's the reason for this video. So I had said that skill matters more than list. I stand by what I said, um, and I will get back to why I stand by that. But Whiskey Jack's main claim is that a statement like that, skill matters more than list, is heavily contexted and specific in his opinion. And it's not easy to untangle, and I completely agree. It is not easy to untangle. I have actually done videos where I try to untangle what I think it actually is that sort of ends up being the influencing factor on a game of bold action, what it actually is that wins games. They should be somewhere in the video, and I will try to link so they're on my video on this channel, and I'll link them in the doobly-doo as well. Because there was a whole list. We like had 13 points. It's I think something like that I go through all 13 where I'm sort of like, this matters, this matters, this matters. So yes, it is a lot more. There's a lot more factors that go into determining whether or not a game of bold action is won by this player or that player. I agree. I'll get back to why I stand by my list matters more than skill matters more than list at the end. So Whiskey Jack makes some claims. In a 5 versus a 5 list rating match, it might be the skill that decides it, but it might also be the drawing of 6+ order dice in a row in turn 4 or 5, or rolling really above average well, or bad, or at getting the right rolls at the right time or not. Yes, bold action is still a game of dice. It's still a game that can be determined by luck and sometimes is. Although I would argue that on average, most games are not decided by the rolls of the dice. It can happen, but there's a lot of risk mitigation you can do to avoid it happening. So, and most good players do. So if we're talking competitive games, I don't think they're quite often decided by luck of dice rolling or pulling dice from order bags, but they can be. So in games with a lot of variance, even if part of it is being skilled, is to manage the variance. Exactly what I said, right? It's about risk mitigation and about managing this variance. So for me, as a competitive bold action player, I try to keep the variance as low as possible. I I um, I try to avoid, for instance, I try to avoid single shot weapons because it's only one dice. I would rather roll a lot of dice to get an average roll than have one dice that can sort of go all over the place, right? So that is risk mitigation and managing the variance. Exactly what Whiskey Jack is talking about here. But you can't manage all of it. Yes, I agree. There are times when you just roll badly or the opponent roll well. That happens. But you know what? One of the interesting things about this is that you can't change that. you can change everything else. You can change your tactics. You can change your choices. You can learn your deployment. You can prepare. All of that can be done, and that is the skill part of bold action for me. Um, so for me, all of that, and I think it's a way more important part, that managing all of that. And yes, the lists do become part of that management. They're a tool in your management, um, but I don't think that they are the only tool, or maybe not even the most important one. So I'll get back to that one as well. Claim 2. A good player with a tier 3 list can and probably will beat a fairly inexperienced or a bad player with a tier 5 list. Yes, that happens all the time. I've done it many times. But let's say a tier 1 list with no anti-tank against armor. Can that happen still? Yes, but it's really difficult, isn't it? You can have matchups. Let's look at it like this. There are certain hard counters to certain list builds, not just tiers, but list builds. So if you have a list build where you have 0 anti-tank and the opponent only runs in his Darker Stewards, right? You can't do anything. It's really difficult to win that matchup. I would say it's almost impossible to win that matchup. So lists can determine matchups, but in my experience, it's only when you have hard counter lists that it's the list that wins the whole game. And the reason why I say that lists are not important, and I'll say this again and again and again, they are important. Of course, they're important. I'll always bring a good list if I can. They're not the most important thing. It's because sometimes you'll hear, and I've recently talked about this in a video as well, you'll hear non-competitive players say, well, it was just my opponent's list. I had no chance. It was just my opponent's list. And when you do that, you dismiss the opponent's skill level completely. And I disagree with that on every single word. I disagree. It's the worst thing I can think of. Um, So, so for me, I'll always say the opposite, that skill level is way more important than list. I will not say that lists are not important. And I really got confirmed in this assumption that skill level is more important um, after starting going to the WTC. And especially after talking a lot with Russell Wright about the WTC and about how that turned out in a meta format. You can go and watch my videos on that as well. So Whiskey Jack says that I think it's at the end a combination of list building, skill, and luck. I think that there's a lot more factors than that, but yes, those three are definitely part of it. I don't think list building is the one that's the most important, and that's why I say skill is more important than list building. Especially in bold action with lots of variables and swingy design points. I actually find bold action to be less of a variable than many other games I've tried. So Infinity, for instance, Infinity the game, you've got because you roll d20s, so there's a lot more outcomes that can be determined, and because you have fewer models on the table in Infinity as well, it can be a lot more swingy, and the points values for Infinity and the support is amazing. It's a really good game, but I feel bold action to be a lot less variable. Also, a lot less variable than I found Warhammer and Warhammer 40k. I haven't tried Age of Sigmar or Legion or any of the newer games but I also played a lot of X-Wing back in the day, and that also has a lot of interesting points. But for me, X-Wing turned out to be a lot more about list building than I think Bold Action is. Maybe it's because X-Wing had a lot more buy to win, a lot more codex creeps, if you like. Um, so the list building became a lot more important. Again, not all, because the good players at X-Wing, they're really good. But it all interacts. I agree completely with that. Claim number 3 is skill and good list building. Picking solid build types and list designs is strongly related in competitive play. Yes, it is. Absolutely. You will typically see good players bringing good lists. Hands down. But what is good? That varies. Because national metas, local metas are not the same. That changes from area to area. So when we went to the first WTC, we were surprised. We had looked at everyone's lists, and there was a lot of lists that we actually dismissed as being bad. That list is just no good. And that was because we were locked in our own metas. And I think a lot of other people did the same at the WTC, the first one especially. They were locked in their own metas. They were locked in their own thoughts about what was good and what was bad. And once they got into other people's metas and they started seeing what they were doing, they were surprised. Everyone was surprised. So I think that good is a good list build, a good meta is not the same depending on where you go. And you will be surprised by what other people are doing and what they can make work that you didn't think you could. There's a lot of evidence suggesting that list building meta play is a big part of the puzzle and probably the biggest constant controllable at competitive levels. That is where we disagree, Whiskey Jack. I think that there is one part that's more important, and that is skill and training. And now we come to it. Right, so most successful players play the stronger factions. Yes, they do. Of course we do. And we do that because we want to win. We want to maximize our chances. So I'm not saying it doesn't have any effect. There are clear things that have an effect. There are clear unit choices that have that are optimized. There are clear meta periods. All of that, yes, hands down. I just disagree that it's the biggest controllable constant at competitive levels. I think that it's skill and training. That's the biggest controllable constant. You can control your own training, and you can control how much you actually work at the game. And I think that that is more important than list level. Now, here comes here comes my argument. Yes, before we get to the next bit, let's do it here. After the last WTC, Cork, Russell did a lot of number crunching. He did a lot of meta number crunching, and he put out a huge spreadsheet, and he had all the captains and all the players that the captains could get a hold of give him feedback on lists. How good was the list? 1 to 5. That's where I got my idea for the 1 to 5 for. And how good were the players? 1 to 5. So we were rating each other. You didn't rate yourself at any point. You rated each other. And what we found out, what Russell found out, was that you could, if you were only looking at the lists, then you could predict who was in the top 50% just by lists at a 60% accuracy rate. So that means that just by looking at lists, you can't really predict who ended up in the top half. Not 60% is still fairly good. It's not nothing. But if you were looking at what people were rating other players as, how good is that player? Is that the best player I've ever played against? Then you were 80% accurate. So for me, the predictive power of that accuracy of rating skill above list actually speaks to why I would rate skill as being more important than list, because you can predict it way more accurately who is going to end up in the top than you can with just the list. Now, of course, there is the good players tend to bring good lists, but we didn't actually see 100% that people who had brought good lists were the good players, nor that they ended up in the top half. Although there was, of course, the bad lists, most of them ended up at the bottom. Then we also saw that if we looked at the at the players who were at the absolute top, most of them didn't actually bring fiver lists, although some of us did. Um, the list were rated around 4 to maybe 4.5, maybe 5. That was the rating for the top 5, the best 5 players in the world right now. 4 to 5. That's not the absolute best. That's not the pinnacle of meta, is it? And they were winning the WTC, what is, we assume, the most competitive tournament right now. So so for me, the player skill level is a more important, a more decisive factor than lists are. I'm not saying that the lists don't help, and non-competitive players have complained to me quite often that why do the best players always bring the best lists? Well, it's because they want to compete, and because we think of list building as being part of the competition. So, but I think that a good player can't just pick up any list and just go and win a tournament. A good player picks up a list that matches their play style, that matches the nations that they like to go and bring, and they have trained with that list. If all of that is in place, then whether or not other people think that that list is a 5 or a 3 doesn't really matter. If you've trained extensively, if you think that this list is the best you can do with your preferred style of play, then I think that that is the best you can do, not just going with meta lists. And of course, there's always the counter meta list, which I'm not going to talk to you about today. So that's why I'm saying what I'm saying. Now, for something naughty. At the end, if skill is really the most important thing, here's a challenge for all super competitive players / Bo for his next series event. Go to your next important, not a fun tourney, important event, highly competitive players with a tier 3 list, and see if your skill carries you to the top 5. I haven't actually done this, but I have taken a non-competitive tournament, a non-competitive list to a tournament, and it was a competitive tournament, yes, but it was not a tournament where the competitive players could actually win anything, so it didn't really matter for us, and I still won all my games. It was Swiss draw and everything, so I did end up playing against good players, but I won all my games with a non-competitive list. So, but I'm guessing a lot of other people didn't bring very highly tuned lists. So I have brought a tier 3 list to an event. Will I do it though? Well, I'm not sure I'm picking up this one. It's a good challenge though. I really like it. It's a good idea. For me, I play this game because I enjoy the competitive side of it. I enjoy trying to win. And if I'm handicapping myself, I'm not trying to win anymore. I'm trying to prove a point on the internet. So I'm not saying I'm never doing this, Whiskey Jack. It's a really good idea. But I am not going to do this at any of the tournaments that I care about right now. So I am going to try and win the next WTC if I can, and I am going to try the next like big tournament abroad. I am going to try and win those and bring lists that are really good. But you know what? The list ratings that I often receive are my lists are around 4, but they fit my playstyle really well. But they're not, yeah, they're not fiver lists most often. Anyways, thank you so much for the comment, Whiskey Jack, and thanks for the conversation. Cheers.